everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Now, I'm starting an AWS series where I will try to cover the most common AWS concepts, and these concepts will help you implement or understand the AWS terminologies and how different AWS services work. Now, the first one I wanted to start with the S3 bucket because that is the most common service that is used throughout the industries. And this in this series, I will show you how you can host your static website using AWS S3 bucket. Now, before starting, let me introduce myself. I'm Sushil. I have more than a decade of industry experience. I'm a certified cloud and DevOps expert, and I've helped organizations implement their cloud, on-premises, virtual, DevOps, organizations, and implementations. I'm passionate about fitness and technology, and I share my knowledge using the techguy.in. Now, as I mentioned in this video, I will talk about how you can host your static website in using S3 bucket. Now, before starting this video, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe because I am already covering topics on Azure. I've started series on AWS, and after this, I'll be starting a series on GCP as well. Now, before starting the lab, I want to now my understanding is whoever is seeing this video, they have fundamental idea of the AWS account and AWS services, and they know what S3 bucket is. But still, I'll just give a background on what S3 bucket is. S3 bucket is just like, I mean, it the full form is basically Amazon Simple Storage Service, S3, as the name suggests. It's an object storage service where you can store all your data. You can store a lot of data. That is the whole funda or whole logic behind S3. Now, why would you really use S3? Because you can store and protect a lot of data. You can use ACLs to restrict the network. You can fine grain your access based on the policies. You can optimize your storage using lifecycle management. You can, so for example, you're dumping a lot of data. I mean, you want a storage where you can just store your data. And based on the industry, you might have compliance regulatories where you want to store some sort of data for probably 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, but you know the data will not be used. So you can just dump the data in Amazon S3 bucket and then use lifecycle policies to change tiers and do a lot of things. So S3 basically people would use to store their data in in Amazon service. Now you can virtually store any amount of data and there can be any use case such as data lakes. If you don't know what data lake is, I've created a video about data lake. Data lake I've created with a context of Azure, but it applies here as well. Now that is the whole idea of Amazon S3 bucket. Now if you have someone who is working on Azure, Amazon S3 bucket is just like an Azure blob service. If you know what blob service is also a I mean, in Azure storage account, you can create your containers and you can dump your files in blob storage. And if you're someone who's working on GCP, in GCP we call it Google Cloud Storage. Now, Google Cloud Storage is similar to S3 bucket, where you can store your files and you can store your lot of data in in your Google account. Now this will be a lab, so let me take you to the to my AWS account and let me show you how you can create an S3 bucket. Now this is my AWS account. I can go to service and I can click on S3 because this is something that I recently opened, so that is why it is in recently viewed. Or if you don't see it here, you can just search S3 on top and you'll see the S3 bucket or S3 option. Now I can go to S3, I can go to buckets, or I can just click on create bucket. If you don't see it here, ideally you would see it here because this is a landing page. It gives you introduction and gives you a lot of things. If you don't really see it, you can click on this side and then you have bucket option. Let me create a bucket, and this bucket name has to be unique. It has to be unique globally, not only in your account, but it has to be unique globally. I'll show you why, because it gets a URL. Let me use the guy bucket and I hope this will be unique. And I'll keep the region default. I can copy data from an existing bucket, which I don't want, but you can choose. I do not have any other bucket, so I'll not keep it. Now I can have the object ownership. I can control the ownership. That is what I was talking about. We can have our ACLs to really have access control defined on the storage account. So we control who is accessing. I'll have ACLs enabled, and I'll keep object writer as my owner. Whoever is writing remains the object, and let me keep it. I'll show you why I'm doing it. Now using ACL you can fine grain the recommendation unless you need to control, but I want to control, so I'll just keep it ACL enabled. Now you also, now S3 is once this is created, you will see we get a URL. It's a basically a public endpoint or public service. So you have an option whether you want to disable all the public access or you do not want to disable public access. Recommendation obviously would be to disable public access, and then you can enable access from a particular IP, from a particular network. You can have VPN, you can define it, you can do a lot of things. The recommendation would always be to block, but for this lab I'll enable public access, and you see it gives a warning that turning off block access might result an object will become public, which obviously is not a recommended way, but I'll just do it. You also have a versioning enabled, which means when you make changes, there will be multiple variants created. I'll not use bucket versioning. You can create tags. Then you have encryption enabled. There are different type of encryption enabled. One is Amazon managed key. You can have your KMS, key managed service also, which I do not have. I'll just keep the Amazon, the default one. And I can go to advanced setting, and I can enable lock, which I will not create. And let me click on create bucket. Ah, I was doing some testing, so it is already there. Um, I okay, and my bucket is created. Now, if you want to see how many buckets you have, again we can click on buckets option, and I click on bucket. I see my bucket. Now this is the bucket that is created. I do not have any files. Now my intent of this lab is to show you how you can upload your how you can use S3 bucket for a static file. Now I can click on upload. Now let me go back. You have an upload option here, and I can click on upload, and I can add files. Now I have created the files. Now let me show you what I've created. Now this is what I've done. I just have a default index HTML where I just have this thing, and I have a simple JavaScript which is basically referring the hours of the day. It's just a very simple static website which is targeting this target file.csv, and I just have these names. Mm. Now I do this policy.txt or something else, but anyway, I have this. Now you see this is my bucket, and let me upload. Let me just upload it for now. And I upload. Now my files are uploaded. It's pending. Let's give it a minute. And other thing that I want to show you is if you want to change anything, all the files are uploaded. If I want to change anything in my bucket, I can go to bucket, and this is the action tab. I can select a file, and the action tab will tell me what I want to do. I can rename, I can edit tag, I can edit metadata, I can download, I can do a lot of things. So this action played is something that really tells you what you want to do with action or with the file. You can open it in a new blade, which actually opened in a new tab, but it just shows me this index.html file. So I can do a lot of things. Now I can go to my properties of the, you see I'm in the property of my bucket. Now I have an option of static website hosting, which I'll edit, and I enable it. Now when I enable it, asks me what is my HTML file. Now my HTML, if you remember, the name itself was index.html, and it's not necessary that you'll have the same name. Whatever name you have, you can update the name, and I click on save changes. Now let me show you something. Do you think it will work? Now this is the link, and it doesn't, because if you remember, I had ACL enabled, because I, even though my uh, bucket is public, I have public access enabled, but I still am controlling it using my ACLs. So what I do now is I go to permissions, and see, I have block all the public access. I go to permissions, so I can control everything from the permission. This is my bucket. I can block or enable public access, but I can allow or I can add policies using my bucket policy. I click on edit, and I have created this policy. So in AWS, you can just write these policies using this JSON template. Now what I'm doing is I'm naming my policy as static website policy. The SID is S3 get object allow, which is basically the action is to get the object, and what is the resource. The resource is this is my bucket name, and I'm giving the access to all the principal. Now let me save this. Why am I seeing this network failure? Save this. Now I have my bucket already created, and let me now refresh this. You see, so I can really host a website, a static website on my S3 bucket, and there are two ways that I can restrict my permission or my access. One is either I can use network. I can allow network from a particular IP, from a particular network, or I can also use ACLs to restrict the access on my storage account. I hope this video helped, and if this video helped, please subscribe and let me know what else you would want me to cover in either AWS, in Azure, or in GCP. Have a good day. Thank you. Bye.